Chair lays that on second reading, Senate Bill 24. The clerk will read the bill.
SB number 24 by Campbell, relating to the inclusion of an understanding of communist regimes and ideologies in the essential knowledge and skills for the social studies curriculum for public school students.
Chair recognizes Mr. Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, polling data has shown that even though a majority of Americans still hold negative views about communism, our younger generations have increasingly been more receptive to collectivist ideologies. This bill in front of you now, Senate Bill 24. Hang on, I'm laying out a bill. Hold on just a sec. Senate Bill 24 seeks to address this generational disparity by directing the State Board of Education to include developmentally appropriate, comprehensive education on the history, tactics, and consequences of communism into the TEKS for 4th to 12th grade social studies. The intent of this bill is to ensure a factual and comprehensive education on communist atrocities paired with a comparison to our great American principles and preventing ideological indoctrination through the use of well-documented historical evidence. Move passage.
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chair Leach. Just a couple of questions. On page 1, on sub 1, you note to include the history and tactics used by communist movements inside the United States, in the United States. Did I read that correctly?
You talking about the bill?
Yes, the bill.
Where are you looking at?
Page 1, line 15.
The history of and tactics used by communist movements in the United States.
I read that correctly, right?
Yes,
Okay.
the language is what the language is.
I'm curious about that because I know you're a very well educated person. You're aware of the McCarthy movement between 1950 and 1954, correct?
Correct.
And during that period, there were many allegations made against public officials, celebrities, professors, people who I guess Senator McCarthy disagreed with, and he named them as communists without any proof. You're familiar with that history, correct?
Of course, yes.
And many of those people had their entire careers destroyed. There were both criminal and civil consequences for them. Many people got prosecuted, were put on trial for things that they had nothing to do with. People were dragged in front of the U.S. Senate to answer for things that they had nothing to do with. Why is that going to be included in the history and tactics used by communist movements in the United States?
Well, I think, look, I don't want to get into a in-depth discussion about the atrocities of communism. I'm happy to do that. I'm not sure now is the time or this bill is the place to do it, but it's clear to me that communist movements in the United States can be traced back all the way to World War I. You have cited some examples during the McCarthyism era where there were accusations made from people against people whom were innocent, but there's also a vast number of, probably countless examples in our nation's history where the communist movements, both expressly and hidden in all sectors of our society, were prevalent. And this bill seeks to prevent that from ever happening again by teaching the appropriate and accurate history to our students in 4th through 12th grade.
So I kind of actually am on that point. You've said that this history should be comprehensive, they should be accurate. Now, talking about the history of people who were accused of being communists in the United States, people that you personally said on the front mic, that people who were found to be innocent, that should be a part of the education if it is to be a complete and accurate, should it not?
And I'm sure it will be.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the accusation, the spread of communism started prior to World War I. You understand that much of that history was because of the labor movement, that the accusations were that the people who were demanding fair wages, people who were demanding more reasonable work hours, people who were demanding that there be workplace safety and that just not have people crushed by machines every day, that they were communists because they were asking for rights for workers.
Sure, and I would agree with you that an American citizen who simply supported FDR or the New Deal initiatives during the 30s
Exactly.
and 40s, those people just by way of supporting FDR, the New Deal initiatives aren't in and of themselves communist. However, I would also say that there's no question, and history supports that communist membership increased substantially during those years, and that is a part of our nation's history that in many ways needs to be taught, not just of the greatest generation and the fight against fascism and communism in World War II, but also just the reality of communism, what it has meant for people all over the world and what it has meant here in our own country. And contrasting that with our great American ideals, there's a stark difference. It is black and white, night and day when it comes to the ideals underlying communism, the foundations of communism, and the foundation of the great country of America. And that's what we want to teach our students in 4th through 12th grades in our public schools.
Absolutely, and just as a intellectual point, and I know you are very well educated. You have a law degree and many other degrees. Should a well-rounded education not include the complete history of what happened? Granted that there were probably significant increases in membership, whatever, but the number of people being accused of being communists was nowhere close to the actual membership, and that many Americans were attacked, were prosecuted, both civilly and criminally, accused of being communists when all they were asking for were rights for themselves and rights for their coworkers.
At no point have I argued or will I argue that the American system is perfect and that there are not flaws. We are a government of the people and by the people and for the people, and therefore the people are going to not be perfect. And so certainly we should teach our students accurate history, including the imperfections in American history. But when it comes to communism and the devastation that communism has caused across the world, and that could have been caused here in America had there not been generations of great Americans who fought against it, then I think we are doing our students a great disservice. And when I see the polling about how over 80% of Americans, over 85% of Americans oppose strongly the tenets of communism, but we are seeing an increasing interest in communism among our younger generations, that's of great concern to me. And I have a position, as you do here, to say what we want to be taught to our kids in the TEKS, and I believe that the true history of communism should be part of that history.
Absolutely, and I personally would have crafted this bill, if this was my bill, I would personally have crafted it to talk about American democracy and why democracy and in a liberal society that grants every person freedoms is more important, that it's a better system instead of just one. Because you would agree with me that there are other systems of government that are also problematic and dangerous, like authoritarianism, theocracies, dictatorships. Those are also systems of government that our country has both fought against and are ideologically opposed to. Would you not agree?
I think I don't know if I misheard you, but I just want to make sure I understood. Did you just say that democracy grants our citizens rights?
Yes, a democracy that grants everyone equal rights is superior.
The American form of government, our democracy, does not grant me rights, and it does not grant you rights. You have God-given rights, and I do as well. And our system of government is designed and is meant to protect those rights, to safeguard those rights.
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Well, I don't think we're talking about the same thing, because communism disagrees with what I just said, is that you don't have God-given rights. The government gives you rights. The government gives you property. The government gives you everything you have, and you have no fundamental rights that are therefore to be protected.
Absolutely.
God-given rights to be protected by the government. And so you are making my point for me. This is why we need an accurate history lesson between the ideals that undergird communism and the ideals that undergird our American system of government.
And I don't disagree with you.
I don't
disagree with you. What I'm asking is, the things that you've talked about, the philosophy of where people get their rights, the same would be true in a dictatorship, The same would be true in an authoritarian regime. The same would be true in a theocracy. Should we not discuss those systems of government, since those are antithetical to our American democracy as well?
If you want to bring a bill that talks about other systems of government and how they are how they compare to our great American system here of freedom and capitalism and free markets, then I'd be happy to entertain that bill. That is not what this bill is intended.
Absolutely.
That is outside the scope of this bill.
In your bill, does your bill direct schools to talk about the difference between a government and the people that come from those countries?
The bill is very, very clear, Representative Wu. If you have a specific question about a section of the bill, I'm happy to go through it.
There's nothing in your bill that talks about that, correct?
That talks about, say it again?
That there is for example, that there is a difference between Cubans who are coming here and fleeing Cuba and the Cuban government as a whole.
I would direct you to page 2 of the bill, section G, lines 7 through 10.
Okay.
The bill makes very clear that the history should be taught about the oppression and suffering experienced by people living under communist regimes, including mass murder, violent land seizures, show trials, concentration camps, forced labor, poverty, and general economic deterioration. Whether those people came from Cuba, from some other country, communist China, wherever it may be, any people group, any person that has experienced the oppression and the suffering that communism has brought and still brings, then those groups, those people groups should be talked about.
And my question is, should your bill make a special point to point out to students that it is not appropriate to treat individuals from those countries as having the qualities of those countries, saying like just because you're a refugee from Cuba, it does not make you a communist?
That is correct. However, if I say I'm a communist, then that does make me a communist. And if I say I believe in the communist principles, then that does make me a communist. And if I respond to a poll, which many of our younger generations are doing, saying I'm kind of interested in this communism thing, and I don't really understand how it differs from the American system of government and the great American miracle that we have here, that's what we're trying to do, is to prevent what you're talking about. We are trying to prevent the spread of and the rooting of communism in our public schools.
And I appreciate that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm asking is more specific, is that would you entertain an amendment that says that specifically we want to make sure that students, as they're being taught this, are taught the difference between individuals who have not made one choice or another, who have not made statements, who have not taken any action except come to our country, except often to flee these countries, to flee these repressive regimes, and to come here to say we should not treat people as a whole that they are one way or the other unless they've done something themselves. If they themselves have said, I am this or I am that, that's one thing, but we should not presuppose that for people just because of where they come from.
I believe that's included in the context of this bill already, Representative Wu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kitzman, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a few questions?
Gentleman, yield for a few questions.
Yes, I will.
Gentleman yields.
Representative Leach, are you aware that communism is responsible for more misery and murder around the planet in the 20th century than any other form of government?
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for some order if we can. I'm having a trouble hearing.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
Representative Kitzman, I think I heard you correctly. I'm not sure the body did, but I want to give you an opportunity to repeat what you just said.
Are you aware that communism is responsible for more murder and misery around this planet in the 20th century than any other form of government?
I am. Yes, sir. Well said.
Are you aware that in China, estimates up to 70 million Chinese were killed by their communist government in the 20th century?
It's horrifying. Yes.
Are you aware that in the Soviet Union, that Stalin's responsible for killing over 40 million of his fellow Russians?
I am. Yes, sir.
Are you aware that one of the reasons we have a problem in Ukraine and Russia today is because there's still people alive in Ukraine that remember when Stalin starved those people to death by the millions in the name of communist revolution?
Preach it.
would it not be important that our children find out that it's just another equal form of government, but it's one of the most heinous things mankind has ever done to itself in the history of this planet?
Well said, Representative
Thank you.
Kitzman. And
Members,
Stan the man, well said. That's why I hope to see no red on the board and an entire board lit up green to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, I move passage of Senate Bill 24.
Chair recognizes Mr. Buckley for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House grant permission for the Committee on Public Education to meet while the House is in session today at 6:30 p.m. in room 1W14, Agricultural Museum, to consider pending, referred, and committee business.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection to the adoption of the motion? The chair is none. The motion is adopted. The following announcement, the clerk will read the announcement.
The Committee on Public Education will meet today at 6:30 p.m. in room 1W.14, Agricultural Museum, in a formal meeting to consider pending, referred, and committee business.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Goodwin.
Chair recognizes Ms. Goodwin on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cruelty of regimes, massacres, and genocides are atrocious, and our students ought to know that we must strive to never repeat them. However, the political ideological spectrum spans from communism to fascism. If we ask our students to understand the ideological and political motivations behind the genocides carried out by communists, we must also ensure they understand the atrocities committed by fascist regimes, those that operated under the banners of extreme nationalism, racial supremacy, and totalitarian control. Ignoring one side of the spectrum while scrutinizing the other creates an incomplete and potentially misleading historical education. Our responsibility is to equip students with the full truth so they may recognize the dangers of all forms of authoritarianism, no matter where they fall on the ideological spectrum, and uphold the values of human dignity, democracy, and freedom for future generations. I move adoption.
Members, Ms. Goodwin, Chair recognizes Mr. Leach to speak against the amendment.
Sure. I'm going to move to table, and the reason is because I want to send this bill to the governor's desk as quick as possible. You want to bring a bill opposing fascism and teaching our kids about the history and horrors of fascism, I would gladly sign on to that. But I don't want this bill to become a Christmas tree. This bill is about communism alone, and so I'm asking you to stick with me and table this amendment.
Chair recognizes Ms. Goodwin to close.
Members, it's truly important to show all sides of an issue and to make sure our students understand not just communism, but fascism as well, to understand what that has done to other countries, but to also to talk to them about the genocide of Jewish, Romani, and even LGBTQ plus people, of political opponents, people with disabilities, all of the minority and ethnic groups that have faced atrocities. We should make sure our students understand all of these things.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Rodriguez Ramos, for what purpose?
will the gentlelady yield for some
The lady
questions?
yield for questions.
Yes.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Representative Goodwin. We just spoke about, you're talking about fascism and the millions of Jews and Polish. We're talking about 11 million people, right, who died. You're referencing specifically World War II and fascism and how it also impacted, or did it impact Americans as well?
Yes.
And are you aware that there are different key steps or indicators that are very relevant to these times to talk about fascism, like one of the steps or one of the factors of fascism is exploiting national crisis and discontent. Were you aware that that is part of fascist movements?
Absolutely. And I think what's so important about teaching history is that then we can recognize when those things are happening in the current day.
Yes, and is it your understanding that it's important to educate children because another factor about fascism, because one of the other indicators is cultivating an us versus them mentality. Were you aware that that is also part of the fascist movement?
Absolutely. People were divided, just like we see sometimes here in the United States, where we make others seem different and fearful. And students, when they learn about the history, they're more likely to recognize indicators here at home.
Very good. And are you aware that another of the indicators, something that is important to us as a democracy, is discrediting democratic institutions, criticizing the democratic process, calling them inefficient or corrupt? Were you aware that that's also one of the other indicators?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, today we have a lot of criticism of our higher education, and it's really unfortunate, but it is repeating a pattern.
Yes, and were you aware, do you agree that one of the other indicators is suppressing dissent and freedom of speech? Is that something important for our children to understand as an indicator of fascism?
Absolutely. You know, sowing distrust among the media, that was something that happened in fascist regimes, and sometimes we see that here.
Were you aware that a part of the other thing to build a fascism government is, and what fascist regimes establish strong, centralized control, consolidating the power of the government in the hands of a few people? Do you agree that that's something that's another indicator important for our children to know about fascism?
Yes, absolutely.
Were you aware that fascists use propaganda and manipulation and to control those governments, and that's something that was also an indicator that happened during the Nazi regime?
Yes.
And lastly, were you aware that fascist governments use violence and repression, something that is really close to home here in America?
Yes, you make so many good points, and these are really critical things for our students to understand.
Thank you very much. I think it's a great amendment. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Bryant, for what purpose?
will the general person yield?
Lady, you for questions.
Yes.
Lady yields.
Ms. Goodwin, communism made its debut in 1917 in Russia, is that correct?
I believe so.
And we saw the devastation ultimately that was caused by that for about the next 75 years, isn't that correct?
Yes.
But Russia today, the very same country that was once communist, is now fascist, is it not?
Yes.
And Putin is a fascist, correct?
Excuse me?
Putin,
Putin. Yes.
is a fascist authoritarian leader
Yes.
in the same country where communism began, right?
Right.
So the complete picture is communism and fascism.
That's right.
And every other type of authoritarian regime that may pop up in between. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, and that's why I believe the bill as it stands really is incomplete. It's giving our students an incomplete picture, and that's why I filed this amendment.
Thank you.
Move adoption.
Ms. Goodwin sends up an amendment. Mr. Leach moves to table. The question is on the motion to table. If you are in favor of the amendment, vote no on the motion to table. If you're opposed to the amendment, vote yes on the motion to table. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye, Ms. Goodwin voting no. Show Mr. Harless voting aye, Mr. King voting aye, Mr. Hayes voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 88 ayes, 50 nays, the motion to table prevails. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Hinojosa.
Chair recognizes Ms. Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is similar to Representative Goodwin's amendment but this is more narrow and only includes fascism. It is my understanding last time we sent this bill out of this committee, we did include fascism for a balanced approach to teaching our students, and so this is very narrow. It just adds fascism to this bill, so that is also put into our TEKS. Fascism is far right, authoritarianism characterized by suppression of dissent. Surely we should all be able to support an America and teaching of our kids where dissent is something that is part of who we are, part of the values that we cherish, part of who we are as Americans. Fascism is characterized by strong centralized government with limited individual freedoms and limited political opposition. That is not who we are as Americans, and we should teach our kids the same. And I move adoption.
Chair recognizes Mr. Leach to speak against the amendment.
I move to table.
Chair recognizes Ms. Hinojosa to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're talking about the education of our children. That should be a balanced approach, free from really partisanship, but the telling of the truth. We know the horrors that fascism has caused around the world. We know that that is not who we are as Americans, and that is part of how we should bring up and teach our children in our public schools.
Members, Ms. Hinojosa sends up an amendment. Mr. Leach moves to table. The question is on the motion to table. If you're in favor of the amendment, vote no on the motion to table. If you're opposed to the amendment, vote yes on the motion to table. Record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 85 ayes, 56 nays, the motion to table prevails. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Wu.
Chair recognizes Mr. Wu.
Members, this is not an amendment to script the bill. This is I think, a very reasonable amendment based on what I talked about earlier. My family had its lands confiscated. We lost our farm, we lost our home, and that was what was done to my grandparents and great-grandparents. For my parents' generation was thrown into the fields. During the Cultural Revolution, during the Great Leap Forward, my dad was thrown into fields when he was 13, 14 years old by himself and basically told to either farm or die. And he managed to survive, but about 55 million other people did not. And for me, when I hear people call me a communist spy, or when members of this body do say those things, I get a little offended, because our family has been the victims of communism for a very long time. And we fled to this country as fast as we possibly could. And for us, when we come here to again be accused of the same things, and to not recognize that many of us fought against these things back in the homeland, is insulting. For all my friends who were in Tiananmen Square, for those who made it out, for those who did not make it out. This is for them. This is for all the Cubans who struggled to be free, who risked life and limb to go across that 70-mile stretch of ocean. People who fought with everything they had, people who went to prison for decades and decades, many of whom never saw the light of day again, because they opposed these governments. To not give them any credit, to not give them any respect for doing something that is far harder than opposing communism in a democracy. They opposed communism in a communist country. This amendment is to recognize the things they have done, to recognize that all people are not the same, to recognize that people all around the world seek liberty and justice. And I just ask for this amendment to respect
I'll look at it in a minute.
what they have done, respect the sacrifices that they have made, and respect the history that is there. That these countries did not move along without a peep. The people made noise, the people fought, and the people suffered. We should recognize that, and we should respect that.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Rosenthal, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, sir. Tell me, do you feel the need to bring this amendment because of the concern that enacting legislation like this will foster negativity, even racism, especially towards our kids in schools and people on the street?
Absolutely.
And
the whole point of why I'm concerned about this bill is the same point that I've made before, that we're now teaching our children to view other people based on stereotypes, based on a broad general understanding of what their country was. To say, like, if all of these people are from these countries, then they all must share the same trait. For Chinese people who fled the communist country there, for Cubans who fled that country, for people who fled other places. That is simply not true. They do not support those governments. They never supported those governments. They oppose those governments to the point that they fled. They had to flee their own homes and come here.
Right. So,
and the point is that that I am afraid that as we go forward in this, that we will lose that distinction that there are people from those countries who fought valiantly, many of whom in the millions were slaughtered. And we should recognize that. There were lots and lots of people who opposed them and fought bravely. And it is unfair to label an entire population as one way when they were clearly not, when there were clearly lots and lots of people who fought against it and opposed it.
So that's one concern, is that even the folks who were fleeing those oppressive regimes and standing up for actually American values that are our values. The other part is the danger of being stereotyped and caricatured to the point where you're dehumanized. And I don't know if you would agree with me, you might say the Jewish people have a little bit of experience with being stereotyped and caricatured to the point where it's dangerous to our communities.
And I started the questioning of Mr. Leach with McCarthyism, because that is always our fear, that we would go into this political frenzy where we look for people and we label the people we don't like as one thing, and we don't give them an opportunity to defend themselves. We make those accusations without evidence, and we just say, it is what it is. And we start this round again. And during the 1950s, during the height of McCarthyism, lots of Jewish people were simply rounded up and labeled as communists because they were Jewish, because they opposed the people who were doing this, because they were liberal, because they were whatever they were. It's an easy target against people who are in the minority.
Exactly. And so this debate reminds me of the McCarthy era. And so can you tell me what the phrase was that started the end of the McCarthy era?
If it was another time, I could answer you, but it's been a long day.
The phrase was, have you no decency? And so the question is, when will we find our decency?
Absolutely. And members, again, this amendment is not designed to skunk the bill. It's not designed to mess with it. It simply says, as we're teaching all this, could we take a breath and just explain to our children that yes, there were lots of brave people who opposed these regimes and fought against them, and many of them are here today in our country. But many of those same people never left and will never leave. And many of those people were tortured and murdered along the way.
Thank you, sir. And that literally includes your family, right?
Including my family.
Very good. Thank you for bringing the amendment.
The Speaker, will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Vote for what purpose? Does the gentleman yield?
I will.
Gentleman yields.
Representative Wu, you know that I came from Vietnam, South Vietnam, right?
Yes.
And at one time, South Vietnam was taken over by the North Vietnamese communists.
Correct.
Okay.
The South Vietnamese fought bravely and fought bravely against the communists, and they should be recognized for that. They should be remembered for that.
Right, and the South Vietnamese never believed in communism or Communist Party or
Correct.
anything like that. So
Correct.
If this amendment would go on to the bill, then
That if this amendment goes on the bill, we will make sure that the South Vietnamese who fought alongside American troops and died alongside American troops are remembered for their actions, are remembered for their opposition, that they disagreed and did not approve of the communists who were coming and invading the South and fought almost to the last man.
all right. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Olcott, for what purpose?
Yes. Does the gentleman yield for a couple of questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
I will.
Gentleman yields.
Representative Wu, is there anything in Representative Leach's bill that actually states that all Chinese are communists or that all Vietnamese are communists?
No, Mr. Alcott, and that is the fear. Because this bill does not say those things, because the bill does not make those distinctions, that I am fearful that they will not teach those distinctions, right? The schools operate on the black letter of the law. They look at this bill and they say, what is the bare minimum we are required to teach? And they will teach those things. And what I want the bare minimum to include is at least one tiny part of this curriculum, one minuscule part of this study should include the people who fought against it, should include the people who gave their lives fighting against this.
But don't you think, Representative Wu, that if this was taught in schools, that the students would be more likely to understand that there were Chinese like yourself that fled communism and that there were Vietnamese like Representative Vo that fled communism if this was taught in school, which is one reason I support the bill. And that's why I'm surprised that you weren't one of the first ones to actually sign on to this bill. It seems like it would be a step in the right direction to educate our students about the dangers of communism and why people like yourselves had to flee communism. And it seems to me that it would go a long way in actually accomplishing what you seem to want to accomplish.
So and again, this is why I have this amendment, because I feel this bill is incomplete. I feel this bill does not talk about the complete picture. I feel this bill talks about the countries, but does not talk about the people. The people are very different from the nation. Just like we say, President Trump is the president right now, but not everyone has to agree with him. Not everyone has to support him. And when Joe Biden was president, we can say he is the president, but not everyone has to agree with him or like him. And many people can say, I actively opposed him. That's perfectly fine. But we should have a complete discussion and not just say, because Joe Biden was your president at that time, therefore you agree to all of his policies, you agree with everything that he did. And we're saying that's fundamentally false, because there's many people who who gave their lives fighting against what is talked about in this bill, fighting against those same governments. Nothing in the bill asks teachers to talk about them, to talk about the fact that there are tons and tons of Chinese people who oppose the Chinese government, oppose the Chinese Communist government. There's tons and tons of people who oppose the North Vietnamese government. Tons of Koreans who oppose the North Korean government for the exact same reasons. Nothing in this bill says that, says we teach the complete picture. What I am most concerned about, and what this amendment addresses, is one, I am afraid that those distinctions, those stories will be lost. that those acts of heroism, those acts of bravery will be forgotten. But just as importantly, I'm afraid that this will lead students down a path where they just say, well, we just assume that everybody from Cuba is a communist, right? And that's not a fair statement. That's not a fair statement. That everyone in Cuba supports Castro. That's not a fair statement. And I think this amendment specifically says how ideologies differ across a country's population and how a person residing in a country governed by a communist regime may not agree with the ideology of the government. And talk about how individual people, everyday people, rose up and fought against this. I don't understand why that's so bad.
Yeah.
In fact, if we're saying that these countries are bad, that we should fight against them, we should be praising. We should be praising the people who fought against them. We should be praising the people who were in Tiananmen Square.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Did you have an extension?
Chair recognizes Mr. Leach in opposition to the amendment.
Okay. Members, in short, to respond to my colleague, Representative Wu, all of this is included in the bill. I honestly don't think Representative Wu has read the bill closely. The SBOE is given time. This does not go into effect until the 26-27 school year. They have time to develop this curriculum. It's not us developing the curriculum. It's the SBOE doing it. And if you'll look at it, it requires a comparative analysis of collectivist ideologies contrasted with United States founding principles. And then it gives specific attention to input, this is in the bill, seeking input from victims of communism and from nationally recognized organizations dedicating to commemorating victims of communism. It says the SBOE should incorporate material from existing education programs that provided instruction on the topic of communist regimes and ideologies. I don't disagree with the spirit and the intent of Representative Wu's amendment. I simply do not think it's necessary, and members would ask you to stick with me on a motion to table.
Ms. Button, for what purpose?
For some inquiries.
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Chairman Leach, you and I had some serious conversation because you are my neighboring rep. Do you know that my parents escaped communists to Taiwan during the hardship, and then I was born and raised in Taiwan?
I do, and now you're a member of the Texas House of Representatives, and
Yes.
a damn good one.
Yes, and I'm proud I was born and raised in Taiwan and come to this great country. But I often remind everyone the danger of communism. Isn't that true?
Yes, you do.
And every time I get a chance, I talk people, the freedom is now free, just like our beloved President Reagan said, freedom is now free. That's why people need to understand what is going on in the real world. Isn't that true?
Well said, yes.
Yeah. And I'm reading this. In your bill, exactly, you pointed out that you have the sick input from victims of communism and the nationally recognized organizations dedicated to, it's right there. So do you know that I was deeply moved? My tear almost dropped out when Representative Chairman Wu and also Chairman Vo, they talk about their experience.
Yes, I do.
And I was deeply, deeply moved, and I want each of our members realize how painful they say those things because they personally can share with you. And Chairman, do you know my heart is really broken because it is so important. We need to let the people understand, especially during the school age students, they might be some kind of naive, so don't understand the whole situation, but we need to educate them when they are still at the early stage. Is that true?
That is correct. That is correct. And Madam Chair, you've been around here long enough to know that on a bill like this, which is solely focused on educating our K through 12, 4 through 12 students on the horrors of communism, You've been around here long enough to know that if I, as the author of the bill, stand here and start to accept or allow or support a bunch of amendments, then a bill like this becomes a Christmas tree. And so in order to prevent that, it's not that I don't agree with some of these amendments or that I don't support the spirit and the intent of some of the amendments, but Madam Chair, you know well enough that in order to protect my bill and get it to the governor's desk as fast as possible, that I simply have to move to table these amendments, even though I disagree with them, but on this specific amendment, I believe that it's already in the bill and not necessary.
And I respect your decision, and I'll be supporting your proposal to table this, knowing that your intent is to keep this clean so we can move it and let the people know that how terrible communism is, and we need to let the kids understand that. And thank you for bringing up this very important bill. And also, I know it's supposed to stick with the amendment, but I do agree with you that you don't want to turn this into a Christmas tree.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to table the amendment.
The chair recognizes Mr. Wu to close.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Flores, for what purpose?
will the gentleman, well, I'll wait.
Go ahead.
Will the
Gentleman,
gentleman
you for
yield
questions?
for a quick,
Yes.
quick question? You do
Gentleman
Chairman Wu, I recognize what you're saying with your amendment because, as you know, there is that fear that perhaps it might make people out to be something that they're not. In our very state, in Texas, the Tejanos, the Mexican who were here in Texas when it was Mexico and who were fighting for independence against the Mexican government, they themselves, Mexicans and Tejanos, were discriminated against and were scapegoated after the revolution. And it took a really long time to make sure that people were not treating Mexicans or Tejanos as second-class citizens or as bad people. So I see what you're saying with your amendment. I mean, I don't know if you realize that about our own history, and that's proof that that does happen.
Thank you, absolutely, thank you so much. And this is going in the same vein, and I just want to say, I absolutely have read the bill, and this provision is not in the bill. The provision in the bill says you have to go talk to those people. It doesn't say you have to teach about them. This amendment specifically says, teach the idea that there were people there who opposed those ideologies. That's it. It is a point-blank rule. It says, make sure your curriculum, including teaching, that not everyone in that country agreed. That's it. I think that's a very important point. That is a very important distinction from what is in the bill. The bill just says, well, there were victims. But then what? What did those victims do? What happened to them? What I want us to be able to say and tell our kids is there were lots of people in those countries who disagreed, who opposed these governments and said no and fought back. Their stories deserve to be told. They deserve to be more than just a subsection and a little bullet point. So this is not an unreasonable amendment. This amendment doesn't mess up the bill. The most it would do is ask the Senate to concur with the House amendments. That's it, right? Think this is something simple that the Senate could just say, yeah, no, that's perfectly reasonable, perfectly acceptable. We should teach that there were heroes in those countries too, that there were champions in those countries who fought against us. So I would ask you to vote no on the motion table.
Mr. Wu sends up an amendment. Mr. Leach moves to table. The question is on the motion to table. If you are in favor of the amendment, vote no on the motion to table. If you're opposed to the amendment, vote yes on the motion to table. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Show Mr. Aldous voting aye. Ms. Swanson voting aye. Ms. Isaac voting aye. Ms. Fairley voting aye. Mr. Berry voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 86 ayes, 57 nays, the motion to table prevails. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Rosenthal.
Chair recognizes Mr. Rosenthal on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is an amendment to add mention of National Socialism in Nazi Germany and its resurgence in the United States and Europe in the present day. And I want to be clear about this. I'm not standing at this microphone to burn a bunch of time. I really want to express my grave concerns with the type of messaging that we're forwarding with legislation like this, and the move towards authoritarian regimes like my people suffered under in Nazi Germany, and communities that have been that have survived attempts at eradication throughout history. And so when we're looking at this legislation, at this bill, we're seeing signs of rising authoritarianism, like the politicization of independent institutions, spreading of disinformation, executive power grabs. Does any of this sound familiar to any of you all? Because from my perspective, from the cultural teachings that I grew up with, what we're looking at today mirrors some deeply, deeply disturbing and dangerous periods of history that a lot of us should have learned about in school, that some of us are old enough to remember. Indicators include delegitimizing communities. Isn't that what we're doing right now with this bill? Undermining democratic norms, the rise of extremist groups, the denial of election results. None of this sounds familiar at all to any of you?
Mr.
So
Speaker.
I'm going to move to adopt this amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Turner, for what purpose?
Would the gentleman yield for some questions?
Would the gentleman yield for questions?
I will, and I do hope we can keep this brief. I don't want to extend this part of the debate, but please ask your questions.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative Rosenthal. So your amendment simply adds direction to teach about Nazism and the current unfortunate resurgence of that violent and hateful ideology in the United States and in Europe. Is that right?
That's correct, because if we're going to teach about the dangers of communism, and let me just be clear that Israeli culture fosters one of the purest communist forms of self-governance on the planet. So those of you in this room that claim to support Israel, have you ever heard of a kibbutz? The kibbutzim in Israel are pure communist, pacifist communities. So if we're going to talk about the evils of communism, I think we really should be talking about totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and control over the many by the few, and that's my deep concern.
Yeah. And Representative Rosenthal, regardless of how many of us may feel about this specific bill, I think we all agree that communism. Oh wait. Okay, you back?
Sorry.
That's okay. We all agree. In my opinion, you may or may not disagree, but the evils of communism, I think, are important to be taught as part of a holistic education. But just as bad and worse, actually, is the evils of Nazism and fascism. And we know right now in Europe specifically, we are seeing in several European countries a real resurgence of that ideology coming to fruition in elections there in Europe. Is that not true?
It's absolutely correct, and I would add that we are seeing a rise in neo-Nazism in the United States as well.
We are, and we've seen too many examples over the last few years of where that rise in Nazism has led to violence in our country. And I agree, I think, with you that it is important that young people be taught the evils and the dangers and the historic carnage that Nazism has wrought on the world over the last 100 years. And it's important that those lessons not be lost to history. They must be learned and carried forward in our youngest generation. So I think you have a good amendment.
So you're right, and in Jewish Israeli culture, We say never again, remember? Leolam Lo, never again, and always remember. And so I think what's important here is to connect the totalitarianism, the authoritarianism, with the part of governance that is evil and
Mr.
monstrously
Raymond, for what
dangerous.
purpose?
Would the gentleman yield for
Will
some
the gentleman yield
questions?
for questions?
I will.
The gentleman yields.
Thanks, Chairman, Speaker. Let me ask you, Representative, I support this bill and I support your amendment and I'll vote for your amendment. And if your amendment were to be adopted, would that get you to the point where you would vote for the bill?
If this amendment's adopted, I'll vote for the bill.
And if it's not?
And if it's not, I'll oppose the bill.
Because you mentioned a minute ago that you feel like this bill delegitimizes some people.
I don't think that's what I said.
Well,
I said
would you mind telling me why you feel it's a bad bill? Because I don't agree with you, and I'm trying to get a sense of where you're coming from.
Okay, very good. The danger of the bill, in my view,
the danger
is the danger of the bill, in my view.
I don't think he can hear me. Members, please take your conversations outside the rail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I was saying was, when we talk about communism in absence of connecting it to the totalitarianism and authoritarian regimes that have truly been dangerous, then we risk stigmatizing communities that may come from these countries.
And you've read the bill.
Without making the... let me finish,
And you've read the
please.
bill.
Can I please
Did you read the
finish?
bill?
Yes, sir. If we are not recognizing that the part of communism that is truly evil is
well, I think
the
that if you read
fascist
the bill, Representative, if
totalitarianism.
you read the bill, it makes it pretty clear that that what we would be directing SBOE is to develop a curriculum that does inform our students how horrible communism is and what it's all about, and what happened in countries and is happening in countries like China, like Russia, really like North Korea. So when you say you see a danger that if this bill passes and we start teaching kids about how horrible communism is, you heard Chairman Wu talk about how his parents, how they were treated by communism. You heard Representative Vo, who got on a boat, barely made it over here because of communism, and you think that if this bill passes and we teach that to our kids, they're not going to understand why, and somehow it's going to delegitimize some people in this country? I don't understand where you're coming from. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that there are efforts to spread communism in America today?
Let me ask, if it's okay with you, may I?
And if you would, would you answer this part first? I think it's important. Do you think that there are efforts to promote communism in the United States of America today?
Let me speak to the first part of what you just said first, if that's okay, and then I'll
No,
come.
you
So
asked if
first,
it's okay, so I'm saying no, it's
Mr.
not okay.
Raymond,
I'm asking
I
you to answer the last part of my question. So start with that.
Mr. Raymond, if I can respond, please.
You can respond.
I want to thank you very much for asking the question. I want to thank you very much for asking this question, because I believe in the way that you're asking and the way you have phrased this absolutely illustrates the need to broaden the perspective of this bill and not just talk about communism in the isolation of that word, but connect it to totalitarian regimes. Because communism, in its purest form, in its own form, is pacifist. And so what you're doing with what you're saying right now stokes
What I'm saying is,
hate.
if you read the bill will tell you how they will talk about the history of communism, where it has been terrible, where it's killed millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. That's what the bill says. It doesn't say anything else.
So I
you're making
assert,
it seem
sir,
as though with all respect, you're making it seem as though if this bill passed and we started teaching our kids a little more, because they learned some already, I suppose, but they learned a little bit more about how bad communism has been for this world, that somehow that in itself would be bad to teach them. I don't understand where you're coming from, brother. I really don't. I don't get it. It makes it sound as though you are sort of I don't even want to say what it makes it sound like. It won't come off well.
So first, if that's a question, I'm not sure it is, but what I will say is, if you fail to take a holistic approach to understand what the actual dangers are and where they come
Gentleman's
from,
time has expired.
then you fail to serve the people. I move adoption.
Chair recognizes Mr. Leach in opposition.
I move to table.
Mr. Rosenthal to close on the amendment.
I close. Please adopt.
Mr. Rosenthal sends up an amendment. Mr. Leach moves to table. The question is on the motion to table. If you're in favor of the amendment, vote no on the motion to table. If you're opposed to the amendment, vote yes on the motion to table. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Show Ms. Fairley voting aye. Have all voted. There being 87 ayes, 55 nays, the motion to table prevails. Anyone wishing to speak on, for, or against Senate Bill 24? Chair recognizes Mr. Raymond. The chair recognizes Mr. Raymond in favor of the bill.
I know you guys don't want to hear speeches. I'm not really talking to the Republicans right now. I'm talking to the Democrats. And I have to speak on this. Because let me tell you something, Democrats. Read the bill. John, read the bill. The oppression and suffering experienced by people living under communist regimes, including mass murder, violent land seizures, show trials, concentration camps, forced labor, poverty, and general economic and it goes on. And Democrats, let me tell you something. You vote no on a bill like this, and it defines you in a way that
Mr.
you're
Speaker.
not, in a way that we're not.
Mr. Rosenthal, for what purpose?
I do
Does the
not
gentleman
yield.
yield for questions?
I will not yield.
Not at this time.
I will not yield. So, Democrats, I'm asking you, stop and think about. There is nothing good about communism. Nothing. But if you, no. Please, guys, look at this.
Mr. Speaker.
Let me tell you something. I passed
Mr.
legislation.
Rosenthal, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman
I
yield
will
for
not yield.
one
Not
question?
even once.
One question.
I'm not going to yield to you or anybody else. So
Not at
there,
this
don't
time.
ask me again. I remember when my daughter was in the 5th grade. She came home one day and she said, "Dad," it was 9/11. She said, "Dad, they didn't say anything about 9/11 at school today. That's not right, Dad." I passed a bill so that they would say something about 9/11 every year from then on, and that's what we have in schools today. I passed a bill to make sure that we talk in schools about the Holocaust so that people and our students would know that that happened. So if you want a bill about fascism, I voted for those amendments. I voted for your amendment. That didn't pass, but that doesn't take away from the fact that we have this in front of us. And if we as Democrats continue to take the bait and vote against bills like this, get ready for more, because there are not going to be more of us 2 years from now. There will be fewer. That's just the way it's going to go, because you know communism is wrong. If you think it's right, go live in China for a while. Go live in Cuba for a while. Go live in North Korea for a while. See how that goes for you. So,
Mr. Speaker.
you know, we're all grown up. Do
Mr.
what you want to
Rosenthal,
do.
for what purpose?
But I ask you, I know you're
Will
not
the gentleman
communist. I know you
please
don't believe
yield
in
for a
communism.
single question?
Don't let them paint you that way. That's all I say.
Will the gentleman
Please vote
yield?
for the bill.
The gentleman does not yield. The chair recognizes Mr. Dutton on the bill.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your inquiry.
Is it not customary to actually have open debate on these microphones?
It's not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Second question, is it not normal decorum for us to address each other by last name and title?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dutton on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think in my 20 terms in this legislature, I have never been more mixed or had mixed feelings about a bill. And let me tell you why I have mixed feelings about it. Because on the one hand, I know and feel that this is the greatest country ever. And I know it is because what is done, not only for me, but a whole bunch of people like me. And that's on the one side. On the other side, when you start talking about teaching communists and about the communist regimes and the things that they do, I agree with it. I agree that we should talk about that. But what I also know is this, is that almost every one of the civil rights leaders in this country were first labeled communists. That's what they did to them. And I think if we're going to teach about communism, we ought to make sure that they don't teach anything like that. Our preamble says to form a more perfect union. And what these people were trying to do was form a more perfect union. And I don't think they should have been labeled communists. I'll just give you one example. Most of you know who Jackie Robinson was, right? You know Jackie Robinson. And you thought he was the first black baseball player. Well, you know how he got there? You probably don't know Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was black. He was a lawyer. He was an actor. He was an activist. And he could do just about everything. He starred in Othello. And that caused a problem for the larger community. And so they labeled him a communist. But what Paul Robeson had done when he was a lawyer was, he wrote a letter to the baseball league telling them that if they don't get a black baseball player, he was going to sue them. As a consequence, the league got Jackie Robinson. And that's so you'll know what happened. But even beyond that, what also happened was this. Paul Robeson made a statement during the advent of World War II that a black man wouldn't fight in a white man's war. And the U.S. House Un-American Activities had a hearing on it. And you know who the key star witness was against what Paul Robeson said? Jackie Robinson. And so, if we're going to teach communism, I hope it's not reflective of the civil rights movement in this country. Because I don't think any of them. Dr. King was labeled a communist. W.E.B. Du Bois, yeah, you're right. All of them were labeled communist. And what they really wanted was to just showcase the treatment of black people in this country and to stop it. Because they too thought this was the best country in the world, but it needed improvement. And that's where I stand today, that this is the best country in the world, but it still can be improved. And if somebody labels me a communist, so be it. But I am going to fight to make sure, for example, that every child, Dr. Buckley, can read by 3rd grade, because I think that's important. And so when I say I'm almost bipolar on this bill, because I want to vote for it, on the one hand, but on the other hand, I want to make sure that when we teach about communism, we're not teaching that the people who wanted to make this a more perfect union were simply communists, because they were not. And so I'm going to go to my desk, and between here and there, I'll figure out. I know what Chairman Leach is trying to do, and I think it's important. But I also think it's important to make sure that history gets it right. Most of us recognize that history is always written by the winners, not by the people who were the losers in the whole battle. And many of us were the losers And many of us up here are the products of the people who were losers. And so we didn't get to write the history. We got to live it, though. And so today, and on this bill, I just hope that the TEACS talks about these folks who were the civil rights leaders who said that we simply want America to live up to its true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal.
Mr. Rosenthal in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not actually going to speak at the end of this, but the debate has inspired me to oppose the bill. And I'm gonna be super brief. All I'm gonna say is, for those of you that don't remember or learned about McCarthyism, please learn it up. Please study that. This echoes of that era. And if we label one regime with a word, and we just say communism is evil, and we fail to connect that with the other types of totalitarian, authoritarian, oppressive regimes that must be opposed and defeated across this planet as they rise right now, if we fail to connect those things and we fail to oppose them holistically with intelligence and understanding, then we are failing our society. And that's why I'll be opposing this bill. It rings of McCarthyism.
Mr. De Ayala in support of the bill.
I do promise to be brief. Earlier this session, I told a little bit about our family history. My parents and my older brothers fled Castro's Cuba to come here. And I had, whether you call it a benefit or not benefit, of listening to the stories, of hearing what was happening, growing up in the comfort of West Houston. I wouldn't be here in this body if I didn't grow up with that kind of history in our family, and to see the contrast between that form of government and ours. Back to the bill. The bill talks about an education so that our students understand the difference in ideology, and not just the ideology, but how it manifests itself in reality. And that is so important because the ideology, in theory or in the abstract, can be somewhat alluring. But only when you see it manifest itself in real time, in real communities, in real people, do you understand how horrible that form of government is. To teach it the way this bill suggests it should be struck for those to put the curriculum, I think for those in our schools would be the best way for them to understand in reality what this form of government is and how it manifests itself in the world. I support the bill strongly. I hope you all do too. Thank you.
Mr. Leach to close on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I am proud to bring this bill to you, and Chairman Dutton and all of you members, I invite you to vote on this bill, to vote for this bill. Chairman Dutton, everything you just said I agree with, 100%. And if as you say, if the SBOE in drafting this curriculum does not respect us, then they should expect us, okay? I think we've made clear what this legislature intends with this bill, and that is to promote American ideals and to continue to fight against the horrific atrocities of communism. If you agree with that, then vote yes on this bill. With that, I move passage.
The question occurs on passage to third reading of Senate Bill 24. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Leach voting aye. Show Mr. McQueenie voting aye. Have all voted. There being 112 ayes, 20 nays, Senate Bill 24 is passed to third reading.